Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we are stepping into a place where the echoes of history are, well, they're almost palpable, like the crumbling stone itself, and the very air seems to hum with untold stories.
It really does.
Our destination is Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Just hearing that name, you can almost feel the weight of its past, can't you?
Absolutely.
This isn't just some old building. It's this colossal Gothic revival structure. It stands like a, I don't know, stark monument right in the heart of a busy city.
Hmm.
It was once hailed as this revolutionary beacon of prison reform, believe it or not.
But it became something else entirely, a chilling testament to profound human suffering.
It's quite a story, isn't it? How Eastern State Penitentiary, or ESP as people call it, began with these really idealistic, almost utopian goals.
Right. The vision was to create a kind of crucible for personal reform, spiritual reflection through absolute isolation.
But the reality
Well,
is,
the reality was a brutal slide into psychological torment.
and for many it seems, a deeply unsettling source of enduring paranormal activity.
That's the core issue, isn't it? The question we're really looking at today is, can that kind of deep, intense suffering, can it really leave an imprint?
So deep it makes it one of America's most haunted places.
Exactly. So we're going to journey through its, noble but ultimately flawed beginnings, then explore the stark, crushing reality of its famous Pennsylvania system. And finally, confront the pervasive, eerie paranormal stuff that people report from its decaying cell blocks.
It's a path that takes us from this grand, maybe dark utopian dream to the crushing weight of its reality and then into these lingering, unsettling echoes. Echoes that still seem to resonate within those walls.
So let's start at the beginning, the dawn of what was meant to be this dark utopia.
Yeah.
The whole concept for Eastern State grew out of the big aspirations of the young United States right after the Revolution.
Yeah, there was this incredible drive then to align public institutions with these new Enlightenment values.
And that included the criminal justice system, which, let's face it, was often pretty barbaric back then.
Oh, absolutely right. Before this, prisons were mostly chaotic, filthy, brutal places. Jails were just holding pens, really, not for rehabilitation.
Right.
Inmates didn't matter age, gender, crime severity, they were often just thrown together.
Wow.
Imagine common rooms packed with petty thieves next to murderers, men, women, even kids, all crammed together, often in squalor, disease running rampant, abuse, more crime happening inside.
That's grim.
And punishment was public flogging, stocks, humiliation, physical pain. It was about retribution, scaring people straight, not reform.
Okay, so against that backdrop,
Yeah.
in 1787, just weeks before the Constitution was drafted, actually, this group of influential Philadelphians got together. Not just anyone either. We're talking Benjamin Franklin, the physician, Dr. Benjamin Rush. Big names.
They formed the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons.
So what was their big idea? Their driving philosophy.
Fundamentally, it was revolutionary for the time. They believed humans could change, could be reformed.
That wasn't the common view.
Not at all. The prevailing view was often that criminals were just, depraved, irredeemable. This group genuinely felt that if you removed people from corrupting influences, gave them time for quiet reflection, pushed them towards spiritual enlightenment, they could achieve penitence.
Penitence meaning.
True sorrow for their sins, leading to genuine rehabilitation. It was a radical shift.
So their solution, their radical solution was separate incarceration.
Exactly.
Not about punishing the body like the floggings, but about reforming the soul.
Through complete solitude. They thought prisoners would be guided to self-reflection, spiritual thought via the Bible, and ultimately real personal reform.
And this movement, this idea, really set the stage for solitary confinement as we know it today.
Yeah.
Groundbreaking, but deeply controversial.
Yeah, it's crucial to get the philosophy here. They were convinced that forcing criminals into absolute silence, making them confront their own actions, the ugliness of their crimes, that would lead to real remorse.
A desire to live a moral life.
Right. It was basically a utopian blueprint for a prison, built on this belief in human perfectibility through forced introspection.
So to make this vision real, they needed a building unlike any other. Which brings us to the architecture. John Haviland's design. Which, looking back, feels kind of ironic, almost foreshadowing.
It really does. In 1821, Haviland's radial plan was chosen, and it was revolutionary.
Radio plan.
Yeah, picture this. 7 massive cell blocks stretching out like spokes from a central hub, like a wheel.
allowing for constant surveillance.
Exactly. Unprecedented levels of surveillance, heavily influenced by Jeremy Bentham's panopticon idea.
The panopticon, where the guard can see everyone, but the prisoners don't know if they're being watched at any given moment.
Precisely. Creates this constant psychological pressure.
Yeah.
Eastern State was the biggest, most complex version of this ever built.
When did it open?
October 25, 1829. It was truly seen as the world's first modern penitentiary. By the time it was finished in 1836, its sheer scale, it was the largest, most expensive public building ever put up in the U.S.
Wow.
It got immediate international attention, drew visitors from all over, people like Lafayette, Alexis de Tocqueville. They came to study this revolutionary approach.
And the amenities. This part always gets me. It had features that were cutting edge for the time.
Individual cells with running water, central heating.
Before the White House had them.
That's the famous comparison, yes. Each cell had a faucet over a flush toilet. Curved pipes in the walls circulated hot water for heat in the winter.
But these weren't luxuries, were they? They served the isolation goal.
Absolutely. Eliminated the need for communal bathrooms or water sources, anything that might let prisoners communicate. It was state-of-the-art engineering for a social experiment.
And the symbolism in the architecture itself?
Yeah.
It was intentional.
Deeply symbolic, meticulously crafted. Haviland designed that imposing Gothic revival front.
To instill fear.
Yes, specifically to instill fear and sobriety in potential criminals. A real fortress look.
But inside.
Inside, the long vaulted halls were meant to feel like a church or a monastery. Solemn, hushed.
And the skylights.
Each cell had one single, small glass skylight, often called the Eye of God.
Wow.
Not just for light. It represented a constant divine gaze. God always watching, guiding towards penance.
Even the doors played a part.
Yeah, the small, often low metal doors forced prisoners to bow their heads entering, a physical act of humility, submission to the system.
It's incredible how influential this design became globally.
It really is. Despite the controversy, despite its ultimate failures, Eastern State became a model for over 300 prisons worldwide.
South America, Europe, Russia, China, Japan.
All over the British Empire, too. Its radial design, that emphasis on solitary, became a blueprint for decades. It shows the global reach of these reform ideas.
But the Pennsylvania system, in practice,
Yeah.
that often went very differently than planned, didn't it?
Dramatically different. Far more punitive than rehabilitative in reality. The core was absolute extreme solitude.
Individual cells, individual exercise yards.
Right. Small, high-walled yards accessed directly from the cell to prevent any communication. The idea was a prisoner saw no one but their keeper and maybe, rarely, a clergyman.
And they went to incredible lengths to minimize all human interaction.
Astonishing length. Meals delivered through tiny revolving feed slots in the doors minimized even eye contact.
And the guards.
Wore fabric over their shoes, silent footsteps, so inmates couldn't even hear another human nearby.
Wow.
All communication forbidden. Letters censored or just denied. And if a prisoner had to leave their cell,
The hoods.
heavy, blinding masks to prevent any recognition between inmates. Total, absolute isolation designed to force that internal reflection.
The only thing allowed was?
The Bible, the only companion permitted, intended to guide them to penitence, spiritual reflection, moral correction.
But in reality.
For many, it became their only link to anything outside their own head. Or worse, a source of immense psychological pressure, driving them deeper into their minds, often with devastating results.
It sounds like a brutal experiment on the human psyche.
It does, and it drew criticism pretty quickly.
Charles Dickens, right, the novelist, he visited in 1842.
He did, and he had a very different take, a much darker one.
What did you say?
He famously called it hopeless solitary confinement, cruel and wrong. He saw the psychological toll it was taking even early on, questioned the humanity of it all. Dickens was horrified. He observed that the system, instead of leading to reflection or penitence, drove many prisoners mad. Deep depression, mental breakdown.
To what broke them.
He saw people who were once rational descend into paranoia, psychosis, catatonia. The isolation, meant to enlighten, became a direct path to insanity for some.
That's such a chilling paradox.
Yeah.
A system designed to make people better ends up fundamentally breaking them.
Exactly. And as time went on, the system itself just couldn't be sustained.
By 1913, they officially abandoned the solitary system.
Why? Sheer overcrowding. It was designed for about 250 prisoners, remember, each with their own cell and yard.
But the numbers grew.
Exploded. By the mid-1920s, it peaked at around 1,700 inmates. The ideals just crashed against the reality of a growing prison population and the sheer cost of maintaining that rigid isolation.
So what happened then?
Pragmatism took over. It became a congregate prison until it closed in 1970. More like a conventional prison, inmates worked, ate, interacted together.
But the brutality didn't necessarily stop.
No. Even after solitary officially ended, mistreatment and explicit brutality continued, often in pretty horrifying ways.
This is where it gets really disturbing. Beyond just isolation, like the mad chair.
Yes, imagine being immobilized in incredibly tight leather restraints, strapped to a chair for days.
Days. Why?
Insubordination, perceived infractions, limbs would swell, circulation cut off, the psychological torment of being helpless. Immense.
Table water torture.
Abhorrent. Dousing prisoners in freezing water outside in the Philadelphia winter, sometimes for hours.
No, leaving them.
Leaving them outside, often naked, in the cold night air. To freeze! It wasn't just punishment. It was deliberate infliction of extreme pain, terror, hypothermia.
My God, and tongue tearing.
Truly barbaric. Chaining a prisoner's tongue to their wrists.
Oh.
So that any struggle, any movement, any attempt to speak would stretch, tear, possibly rip the tongue. It's grotesque. Designed for absolute silence, obedience, breaking a person's will through unimaginable pain.
It's hard to even comprehend.
And for the so-called worst behaved, there was the hole.
An underground cell block.
Dug right under cell block 14, conditions were unspeakable.
Yeah.
Absolute darkness, total sensory deprivation, no human contact, minimal food.
For how long?
Up to 2 weeks sometimes, completely cut off from the world, left alone in a black void. And cell block 15, next to the hole, guards were apparently gated off from that section entirely, emphasizing the extreme isolation, the lack of oversight.
That definitely sends a shiver down your spine.
Mm-hmm.
But Eastern State also held some very famous inmates, which adds another layer of infamy and legend.
Absolutely. The most famous, of course, Al Capone, the Chicago gangster.
He had a brief stay, 1929.
That's right. About 8 months, May 29 to March 30, arrested for carrying a concealed weapon.
Short stay, but significant.
Hugely significant. Brought massive media attention to ESP and added immensely to the prison's lore, especially the paranormal side, which we'll get to.
Even his cell was famous. Considered lavish.
Relatively speaking, yes, but still a profound loss of freedom for a man like Capone.
Then there was Willie Sutton, the bank robber, famous for escaping.
Legendary. In 1945, he pulled off one of history's most famous prison breaks from Eastern State. Him and 12 others
Ow.
dug a 97-foot tunnel over a whole year using spoons, makeshift tools, undetected.
That's incredible. But wait, there's more to that story.
There is. During renovations in the 1930s, they found 30 other incomplete inmate tunnels.
30.
30. It was like a maze underneath, a testament to the constant desperation, the ingenuity born of wanting freedom.
Wow. It really speaks volumes.
It absolutely does, that relentless drive for freedom.
Okay, before we dive into the really spooky stuff, there's one slightly odd story. Pep.
Pep, the cat-murdering dog. A moment of morbid humor, perhaps.
Inmate C2559. The story goes he was sentenced to life in 1924 for killing the governor's wife's cat.
That's the legend, though a newspaper at the time reported he was actually donated to boost inmate morale.
A prison mascot.
Sort of. A pet, a companion for guards and inmates, a rare bit of light in a dark place. Either way, a dog with an inmate number. It's quite the anecdote. Highlights the strangeness of the place.
It definitely does. A dark moment of levity, as you said.
But even Pep can't really distract from the profound suffering that soaked into those walls.
Which brings us to the haunting echoes.
The echoes, many believe, are still there today.
Okay, now we step into the really spine-tingling part of our deep dive. Act 3. Haunting echoes the spirits of Eastern State. It almost feels like the prison's design, the suffering it caused. Like it created a perfect storm for paranormal activity.
That's a very compelling way to put it. The combination of the long, intense history, the extreme psychological torment from the solitary system, the sheer violence, it seems to have created these ideal conditions for what people describe as lasting paranormal activity.
The atmosphere there is supposed to be intense.
Very dense, heavy. There are persistent rumors of a dark energy somehow locked into the building itself. This feeling, plus countless eyewitness accounts, has really cemented its reputation as one of America's most haunted places.
Let's start with maybe the most famous ghost story. Al Capone's terrifying experience.
Right. Capone, despite his status, despite that lavishly furnished cell rugs, furniture, radio,
He was reportedly terrified during his 8 months there, 29 to 30.
absolutely terrified. His power, his wealth meant nothing against what he claimed was happening.
What did happen?
Guards, other inmates, reported hearing Capone screaming at night, shouting at someone named Jimmy.
Jimmy.
Capone insisted he was being haunted by the ghost of James Jimmy Clark, one of his victims from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago.
Wow. A specific victim.
A brutal event Capone orchestrated, and the legend goes that Jimmy's ghost plagued Capone relentlessly. Not just at Eastern State, but followed him to other prisons, like Alcatraz, tormented him until his death in 1947.
In Capone's cell today, still active.
It's considered a major paranormal hotspot. Visitors report hearing disembodied whispers, sometimes voices calling his name,
Seeing things too.
seeing a dark, shadowy figure standing in the corner where his bed was. It's as if Jimmy's presence is still there, tied to Capone, unable to find peace. The air in that cell is often described as thick, heavy, full of unease.
Chilling. Okay, moving from one famous inmate to a whole area, cell block 12.
Ah, yes. Cell Block 12 is often cited as the absolute epicenter of activity in the prison.
The most active area.
Widely regarded as such. The sheer density of reported phenomena there is something investigators find really compelling.
And what kind of things are reported? This is where it gets really unsettling, right? The sensory stuff.
Very unsettling. People consistently report hearing disembodied laughter, echoing laughter, often described as hollow, mocking, even sinister, rippling from the stone walls when no one's there. The kind of sound that just raises the hairs on your neck.
And visually.
Frequent reports of dark, shadowy figures, often just shapes, moving incredibly fast down the long, empty corridors.
And then they just vanish.
Vanish instantly. Sometimes it's peripheral vision, a fleeting glimpse. Other times, people claim direct, undeniable sightings.
That's terrifying.
And beyond sight and sound, the feeling in Cell Block 12, it's profound, often overwhelming.
Like what?
An overwhelming sense of dread, suffocating dread, a chilling feeling of being watched, constantly watched by unseen eyes from the shadows.
Any physical sensations?
Sudden drops in temperature, cold spots that seem to follow you, a heavy pressure on the chest like an unseen weight. The energy is described as deeply oppressive, likely stemming from the intense suffering in those specific cells.
And if that's not intense enough, cell block 14 in the hole.
Yes. Cell Block 14 held some of the worst punishment cells. Those underground pits, the hole.
The energy there must be.
Incredibly heavy, palpable, oppressive, almost suffocating. A stark, visceral reminder of the extreme suffering endured there.
Absolute darkness, sensory deprivation.
For up to 2 weeks. Designed to break the spirit and the reports from this area, anguished cries, tormented whispers seeming to come from the stone itself.
Anything tactile.
Terrifyingly, yes. The sensation of unseen hands grabbing from the darkness, pulling at clothes, brushing against skin, as if the spirits of those who suffered most are still trapped. Desperate. We're just unable to leave.
People feel emotions there too.
Profound sadness, despair washing over them. A deep empathy for the torment that happened.
But it's not just those specific hotspots, is it? The activity seems widespread.
It really does. Other chilling hauntings are reported consistently across the whole complex, adding to its reputation.
Like the guard.
The figure of a lone guard, sometimes seen in one of the towers, still on duty, seemingly, centuries later, bound to his post.
And the face in the wall.
In Cell Block 4, yes. A ghostly, decaying face that sometimes appears in the flaking plaster. A silent, unsettling image. Features seem to emerge and recede as you watch.
What about sounds?
The phantom blacksmith. People report hearing clear sounds hammer on anvil, the hiss of metal cooling from a cell that used to be a workshop.
But the equipment is gone.
Long gone. It's like a residual loop of sound, an echo from a forgotten time.
And those sudden feelings. Sadness, anger.
Yes. Visitors report sudden, inexplicable waves of emotion, sadness, anger, despair, hitting them out of nowhere in certain areas.
Residual emotions.
That's one theory, that the walls absorbed the overwhelming misery, frustration, hopelessness, and now those emotional imprints are released, affecting sensitive people. A truly haunting echo.
So what does it all add up to? These voices, shadows, feelings? Are we talking about actual spirits, conscious entities trapped?
Or is it a powerful form of residual haunting? The building itself replaying intense emotions and events like a recording?
That's the big question in paranormal investigation, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a fundamental debate. No definitive scientific answer. But the sheer volume, The consistency, the specificity of reports at Eastern State, from unrelated visitors, staff, investigators over years, it suggests something profound is happening there.
Whether it's energy imprint or conscious spirits.
The atmosphere and the reported phenomena are deeply compelling, genuinely unsettling.
And the more recent history is fascinating, too. It closed in 1971.
Yes, finally closed. Escalating repair costs, deteriorating conditions. It was briefly used as a city jail after that.
And then
Then it just stood empty, abandoned, left to nature for years. A crumbling ruin in the middle of Philadelphia. From 71 into the late 80s, it was in this state of preserved ruin. Nature really took over.
a forest inside.
Literally.
Yeah.
Trees, plants growing inside the cell blocks through cracks in the stone, adding to this eerie, desolate feel. Stray cats were the only inhabitants. Urban decay meeting natural reclamation. A really unique, unsettling sight.
But thankfully, it wasn't turned down.
No. A task force, architects, preservationists, historians recognized its huge significance. They petitioned the mayor in 1988, stopped demolition plans.
And it opened as a museum.
In 1994, yes, open to the public as a historic site and museum. Now, hundreds of thousands visit each year, bearing witness to its complicated, chilling history.
And they kept that preserved ruin feel.
Deliberately. It's not just about saving money. It's a conscious choice to show the passage of time, the reality of abandonment, the decay. It actually enhances the atmosphere, makes the history and the paranormal feel even more potent.
So whether you believe in ghosts or not, Eastern State Penitentiary is this unique blend. Architectural marvel, deeply unsettling historical site. It's a place where the atmosphere makes the past feel incredibly chillingly present. And that connection between the psychological impact of the Pennsylvania system and all these paranormal reports, it's hard to ignore. It forces you to think about the legacy of intense human suffering.
It truly does. The scale of that suffering lives deliberately broken. It leaves a mark. And for many, that mark seems to go beyond the physical walls.
It really pushes you to consider the limits of human endurance. So, what does a place like Eastern State Penitentiary tell us about the human cost of penal systems, past and present?
That's a profound question.
And when suffering is that deep, that deliberately inflicted, can it ever really be erased from a place?
Or does it become etched into the very fabric of the walls, as many believe, waiting for those who dare to listen?
It certainly makes you think.
It encourages us to look deeper, to explore other historic sites with maybe a new awareness, to acknowledge that hidden histories, layered with intense human experience, maybe hidden presences, they're all around us if we're open to perceiving them.
A powerful thought to leave you with indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Eastern State Penitentiary. We hope you'll join us next time as we continue to uncover the hidden stories that shape our world.